Right, so with the end of Season 1 and potentially the series as a whole on our hands, it's about time that I started taking a good look at murder drones. Of course, there are still parts of this story that are yet to unfold and our protagonist still needs to finish her arc, but that doesn't mean I won't get cynical about other things. You saw the thumbnail of this video, we're talking about Jay and Doll, who both somehow managed to undergo the same downgrade from genuine threats to mediocre at best side characters. This is the problem with the murder drones villains. Now before we can talk about what went wrong with these two, we first need to talk about what these characters were supposed to be. Jay and Doll are both meant to function as secondary antagonists, characters that get in the way of the protagonists or thwart their plans while the big bad finishes prepping their evil scheme. Draco Malfoy or Severus Snape are decent examples of this. They're weakly linked to the main villain but still have their own goals and aspirations that tend to conflict with the protagonists. Now I also need to establish something regarding Jay in particular because it doesn't really apply to Doll. We see 3 different versions of Jay's consciousness in this show. Episode 5 Jay, who is the earliest, being from N's old memory, meaning it may not be the most reliable, Pilot Jay, who is formed out of Episode 5 Jay and keeps a lot of the same traits, and Episode 6/7 Jay, who appears to have a sort of semi-knowledge of what Pilot Jay has gone through, but isn't entirely sure. To clear up any confusion, I will be referring to each of them separately as J1, J5, and J6. Now J1 is the most typical antagonist version we see out of both of these characters, which is entirely fine. She serves her role as being a dislikable individual who poses a threat to the protagonist and pushes them further into the plot. She also unintentionally reveals the absolute solver, our real enemy, to Uzi and the audience. There's nothing spectacular about any of what Jay does here, but it's the pilot, so you can't expect that much. J1 does what she needs to do, and she dies when she should. The same can be said for Doll, but with a marginally different context. While Doll is actually in every episode of Murder Drones, I know it surprised me too, the first episode where she plays any real role is episode 3, where she's the primary threat. Doll has the advantage over J1 of having 2 episodes to build up and establish the world, and so is able to drop some pretty big lore pieces on us. She explains how Solver works, reveals its drawback, adds some backstory to the secondary protagonists, and fires the only shot in world history more important than this one. Once again, she moves the story forward well, provides a good threat, and then dies. Oh, now here comes my problem with these two. They don't stay dead. J1 comes back as the spooky robo spider crab and gets blown up, but then she comes back again as J6, prompting memes like this to exist. Doll doesn't even wait a whole episode to come back. It takes her all of 5 minutes to go from this to this. Then as soon as she pisses off, here comes J6. 2 reincarnations in as many minutes. Here's why I'm angry at that. Once you bring a character back from the dead for any reason or in any way, it sets the precedent that any character who is killed can now come back in that same way. The second you pull that Uno reverse card, suddenly all of your stakes are out of the window and death or sacrifice in the show no longer carries as much impact. Take V's death. It's supposed to be a gut-wrenching emotional moment as a character who has been known to dislike our protagonist changes heart and decides to trust her in a dire situation. Except not really, because all everyone's doing is debating about how she's going to come back in the comments section. You see how quickly that removes the impact of the moment? Yes, maybe for you it was a good scene and made you feel something, but have a think. Would it have been better if you knew that this was permanent? But maybe it was worth it, you know? Maybe these two have some really key moments that are needed for the show to function properly, and Liam and the boys had absolutely no choice but to bring them back. Well, let's see. Now, I'm not going to count J5 for this since that's a flashback and technically happened before she died, so we're only going to talk about J6. Her purpose in Dead End is 2 things. 1, explain how the revival process works a bit more to further the idea that V will come back, because that's obviously the correct course of action here, and 2, to provide this handy little visual of not-to-scale spires appearing on Copper 9. Okay, so that's something that could have literally been replaced by a watch, but you know what? No problem. She's just entering back into the show. Surely her next objective will be much more important. Yeah, no. She just flies the shuttle around and then gets followed by Thad and Lizzie, who also don't really have a reason to be here. I literally have no idea why this B-plot exists or what its purpose is, but it's there, I guess, and it makes the 22-minute episode turn into a 25-minute episode. Okay, so Jay was a bust. Didn't need to happen. But surely Doll plays a more important part. On the surface, you'd be right. She takes the key bug off of Uzi, twice, then forces V to sacrifice herself to keep the other guys safe. But if you actually think about it, none of what she does is useful. Doll decides to play the Indiana Jones card here and opposes our protagonists in a way that actually changes nothing about what would have happened to them. If she didn't take the key bug either time, Uzi, N, and V would still have ended up going to Cabin Fever Labs, where Jay and Tessa were still waiting. They still would have been attacked by Alice and the Sentinels, and it's still very easy to see V dying, even without Doll directly alerting them to their presence. Mostly because the damn things are everywhere. She doesn't even accomplish anything in episode 7 despite having a massive head start on the rest of the cast, and her only scene is the one where she gets murdered. So again, why is she not dead? J6 and Doll post-episode 3 literally serve no purpose in the story of the show, and it's such a big waste of time, because they sacrifice those precious minutes that could have been used so much better to help these two kiddie pool depth characters. Build up V's death in the episode from the start of the thing. Hell, do it in episode 5 so it doesn't flip so drastically from I want to kill you to I trust you to save 2 of the 3 people I've ever known well. Give N some character development other than I'm in love with Uzi and a below average murder drone. There's so much you could have done with the time that these two have wasted in the back half of this series. They might have been your favourite characters in the show, but they aren't good for it. At least not anymore.